Kennedy Hawk and my co-host Cone. How's it going?
Pretty good. It's been a little while. Glad to be back.
Too long, getting back into the groove of work in the new world. And we are back doing another episode of Marvel Champions Monthly Podcast. So this podcast is a protection. So we have our protection expert here at home to tell us all about the protection aspect. Are you ready to defend these cards that are super viz?
I feel like that's Americano's job, but I guess I took his spot, so.
He's fired. Slash grid. Yeah.
We should have brought him on as a guest for this episode.
Oh, you know what? If he doesn't comment on this one, we'll know that he doesn't play Champions anymore. Nah, he does. All right. Well, so for our protection primer, what we're going to do is give an overview of the aspect, talk through what we think the key cards are and the key archetypes, and what cards go in those archetypes a little bit. Have a little bit of discussion just around the aspect in general. Talk about what heroes mesh well, or particularly well, with protection, and then talk about the status of protection compared to the other aspects, what its identity is within the field of Marvel Champions player deck building, and then we'll wrap up with a deck build, a Tony's Deck Garage. I'll present a Ghost Spider protection deck that I made the last couple weeks in our testing group. Testing Kana heroes, can't wait.
Shh.
Yeah, we shouldn't say that anymore. We're out of tickets now, so.
Yeah, we can't be pepping the con anymore.
If you're not hyped, I'm sorry. You can still print them at home and be hyped, unless we figure out other solutions.
Or buy a ticket on eBay.
Yeah, no. Our tickets are non-transferable. That's not true. I'm pretty sure they are. Okay, well, enough about Kana heroes. Let's get into the meat of the episode and talk about protection. So, green cards. Protection aspect. Can you give us an overview of what you think the core of the protection aspect is? If you're going to give your elevator pitch of protection, what is it?
Well, I think it's in the title. You protect people. Protection. I think I think protection's been really cool because it's evolved a lot. So I think if you ask me what the core of it when the game first came out, I think that's what I would tell you, right? It's protect people, and there was like kind of a splash of a few other things in that first wave, but I think the real only kind of archetype that really popped up was probably this perfect defense in kind of wave one, right? Where you're really just trying to not take damage, and then you'd get bonuses, right? So we saw, a bunch of defense events like Desperate Defense in that first wave. Then we got Never Back Down, which was really fun because who doesn't like stunning that boss? And then, of course, you get the Armored Vest. We got an Unflappable, Nerves of Steel, and then Hard to Ignore. And then eventually we got Flow Like Water, which I feel like all those kind of support cards, you're starting to add like a lot of support cards in there. But once you got all those out, it was really fun to be in the villain phase.
Yeah, I would say that protection started as the most like shoehorned aspect into being able to do one thing. But the more I've played protection, the more I've realized that protection, similar to leadership, gets to sort of do all the things. As protection, yeah, your goal is to defend yourself and your team and potentially your allies and protect what some might consider the most precious resource, your hit points. So we always talk about using those hit points as a resource. Well, if they're always full, that means you are always full of this extra resource that is your hit points. So I think that's the key for protection, is keeping people healthy. And by doing that, you're helping people not flip down. So yes, you might not be thwarting the main scheme, but if nobody has to flip the whole game because you table defend every round, then all of a sudden there's not threat being placed on the scheme every round, and your Justice player gets to do a little bit something different. And if you're defending for everybody, then they can deal with their minions. And if you're defending for everybody, then they don't have to use their allies for chumping. So you kind of get to hook into all aspects of the game, but with your special focus. So I think that's pretty cool for protection.
Yeah, the nice thing is that it's probably one of the only aspects that really gets to do a lot of stuff on the villain phase. And I think that's probably the part of it that makes it unique compared to almost any other aspects in the game. So you get to have this long villain phase, and then your hero phase turns out to be really short.
Yeah, our group at the start of the game used to call protection the multiplayer aspect, because it was when we only played multiplayer, when we had other people at the table. But it was also the beer fetcher aspect, because they would use all their cards during the villain phase, and then it'd be the hero phase, and they'd be like, all right, I'll be back in 20 minutes. Who wants a drink? And they'd walk away and then come back. We'd be on like the third person's turn, and it'd finally be time to get back to the villain phase for them. So pretty fun.
They should just do the inverse where everyone else leaves during the villain phase and they just evaluate everything.
Solve all my things for me. I don't need to deal with that. So yeah, protection has evolved probably the most of all the aspects, in my opinion. I feel like it's picked up the most new archetypes, and it's also sort of strengthened its core the more than any of the other aspects. I think it's one of the most diverse aspects, and I think we'll see that by looking through some of the key archetypes. So why don't you name 2 archetypes and describe them, and we can talk about the key cards in them, and then I'll name 2 archetypes, and we can go back and forth.
Sounds good. So I mentioned perfect defense, but I feel like we should go back to that. So this is all about not taking damage. So I think this is like the support cards that I was mentioning before. I think armor vests, being able to get that +1 defense, really key to that aspect of not taking damage when you're using your basic defense. Unflappable when you don't take damage, being able to draw cards, that always feels good. Makes up for potentially spending any defense event, right? You're getting a card back. Nerves of Steel helps you pay for those defense events. Defensive energy, potentially, if you're playing a lot of defense events, you get to draw cards off of that. Full like water, do damage when you're doing that, hard to ignore. If you defend, not take damage, you can also now remove threat, right? So being able to kind of get all, like, draw a card, get some bonus, and do damage and remove threat, all for defending, seems great, right? And then we've gotten a bunch of, I feel like, defense events kind of out of that. I don't have to go through the list, but I do think Desperate Defense is probably one of those staples of allowing you to defend for more than one person, and then Never Back Down is probably my other one that, if you can stun the villain, it allows you to potentially get 2 defenses out of that, right? Or that second defense is that stun, if you're not playing against any stalwart or steady villains.
Yeah, how I define perfect defense is all those cards that say when you defend and take no damage. So a lot of perfect defense is about mitigating damage to yourself, right? Never Back Down is a really great solo card because you shut the villain down for this phase and for the next phase, so you don't have to worry about it. There's newer cards that let you remove threat and deal damage by doing this perfect defense where you don't take any damage when defending. But there's a lot of versatility in pivoting it into multiplayer as well. And I think Desperate Defense is a really cool card that came out at the beginning of the game, basically, that really is super versatile in how you use it, right? So I'm going to read the card here. It's a 1-cost event. It's got a cool picture of Hulk on it. Hero interrupts defense. When your hero defends against an attack, it gets +2 defense for that attack. So if you're Spider-Man, you're at 5 defense, you're probably not taking damage. If you take no damage from this attack, ready your hero. So that's great in multiplayer, because now you can defend for the next person. It's still great in a solo, because now you can ready and actually use your hero activation during the hero phase to make additional progress. So I think it's really cool that, like, when I first saw that card in my head, I always thought, this is a multiplayer card. Why would I put this in my solo deck? But it actually has a use, and it's like a different use in a solo deck. This is a card that lets you defend, but still remove threat or deal damage. Whereas in multiplayer, this is a card that lets you, like, what I call table defend, like defend for everybody instead of defend for yourself. So, another card that I think is key to this aspect is Energy Barrier. I can't remember if you mentioned it.
I did not.
Energy Barrier is really cool because it is a 2-cost upgrade from the first wave item tech with 3 uses. An interrupt when you would take any amount of damage, remove 1 reflection counter from here to prevent 1 of that damage and deal 1 damage to an enemy. So this means if you had to gamble with your perfect defense and you said, okay, I have 5 defense, Rhino's probably not going to get me, but he 3 boosts and he's hitting you for 6, so you're going to take that 1 damage, you can, like, still save your perfect defense and trigger all your fancy shenanigans, which is exactly what you want to be able to do. So I like getting an energy barrier down early and kind of leaving it out to, like, let me be more gambling with my my defense.
Yeah, I actually often don't mix that in just because I feel like there's just so many defense or like protection cards I want to put in. It's hard, I think, these days to slot that in for me. I think you have your preemptive strikes and stuff as well. Obviously, having an upgrade out there when you can trigger when you want is super nice. The one card I think I have not mentioned is Jocasta. I think she's kind of an auto-clued for a lot of defense-heavy decks, just because being able to have that defense card on the kind of when you don't have the card in hand is really nice. And it's probably one of the few archetypes I think where I will hold cards more so than other things too, just because you want to guarantee you're going to have that defense event going into the villain phase.
Sweet. What archetype do we want to talk about next?
Sure. I think probably the next one that, just going in chronological order of cards we saw, was status effects. So we already mentioned Never Back Down, kind of on the defense side. But I think in the early days you had Iron Fist as that stable ally who could dish out stuns for cost, right? And
We got Tackle early in this.
yeah, Tackle as well.
Attack stuns an enemy.
Yeah. And so I think that there aren't probably as many cards, but I think it does have good access into the ability to do that. In the, like in the Spider Wave, we got Thwip as well. So if you're Web Warrior, you can dish out 2 stuns. So also works around people who are steady, which is super nice. And then you had Siren for minions in the X-Men wave, and then as well in the X-Men wave, or Mutant wave, you also had Psy-Flow Strike for those psionic folks to kind of dish that out. And there was also one more side scheme, I think, in the X-Men wave.
X-Men.
Yeah, Astonishing X-Men.
Every enemy, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I think status conditions are pretty cool for protection to have sort of a focus in. I think a couple of the aspects, all the aspects can do some kind of status condition now, but at the beginning of the game, status conditions are so strong, and they still are, right, especially for solo play. But a lot of times, protection kind of felt like, oh, I could play protection, or I could just stun the villain, and then I don't need to have an entire player whose job is to, like, be a stun every turn. But now protection's strong enough that they can really be more than just that one stun card during their phase, right? They get to trigger multiple things, release some threat, do some damage. So I think we've really seen it grow to the point where like it uses statuses and gets to do its thing on top of itself, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think probably one of the things too with status is that I think it's not a full archetype in the sense, like I think this is what you're kind of saying, but I think it's a one you can splash in, right? Where you want to maybe highlight your hero, highlight some more basic cards, like you can splash in, you can go protection just to splash in some status stuff, because maybe you're Miles, right, and you want to take advantage of being able to do more status effects, right? So you can kind of splash some of these cards in to get access to more of them in your kit.
Status is still strong. While we're on the topic of statuses, we should probably talk about toughness as well. So the status archetype you were talking about was applying Stunned and Confused, usually to the villain, because that's the most nasty activation during the villain phase. But Protection really excels at tough cards. And in fact, right now, I think you could almost make a deck where it's just 25 cards that spit out tough on people, which is pretty crazy. So Toughness has always been like sort of that third status that's the positive status that you want to see. And it's always been something that Protection sort of focused on, right? We had Luke Cage that had it in the core set. But we quickly got things like Perseverance, and now Stunned is sort of all over the place. We have Shake It Off, we have Hard Knocks, both of which are like conditional tough based on defeating a minion or being a guardian and taking some amount of damage. We had Muster Courage in the Avengers wave to give out 3 toughs in expert mode, which is pretty crazy. Now we've got like side schemes, right? So Establish Perimeter and all sorts of things like that. So I feel like it's another way of sort of doing the perfect defense, but with statuses, where you could say, okay, I didn't stun you, but I'm just going to take no damage when you attack me. A little bit countered by piercing, but I think that is sort of like a whole archetype to itself, is bring 10 cards that give you toughness, and use your hero kit as like the main focus of your deck, and then just sort of ignore the villain phase by just being tough every round, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it also leans into making use of Taunt as a card to maybe accelerate. So if you're able to get tough really easily, you don't really care that the villain's going to attack you.
Makes sense. Draw 3 cards. Cards are good.
Yeah.
So the other card to mention around statuses, because I don't really know what archetype she fits in, but Night Nurse, right? Night Nurse is a support that lets you heal an identity for one, or heal a character for one, and remove a status card from it. The status card removal is mandatory, so if you're, you might have to remove a tough card, but typically you're using that to remove villain statuses. So I don't think it really fits into like the status archetype, but I thought we'd mention it here or there.
The anti-status archetype?
Anti-status.
Yeah, she's so good. I feel like she's an auto-include in a lot of... I'm sad I only have one copy of her, but she's definitely an auto-include in a lot of production. Yeah, she's definitely an auto-include, especially for the con, right? Like, having a protection player who can remove status effects is, like, you can really enable a lot of other players at the table when that happens.
Is that a spoiler for custom content? I'm just kidding.
I mean, official content too.
Yeah. Another archetype that I really like is the basic activation and ready archetype. And Desperate Defense kind of fits into that, but there's a ton of cards now that let you use your activation and then ready yourself and use it again. Right, so we have What Doesn't Kill Me from the Spider Wave, where you heal and get to ready yourself. We got Repurpose in the Spider Wave, which kind of is an archetype of itself, where you bring a bunch of tech upgrades, but then ready your hero and pump a stat for the round. Ever Vigilant for aerial characters. And then even in Drax's pack, there was this card called Leading Blow, which I almost used to never run when it came out. Let me see if I can find Leading Blow to read it for people, because it's a really fascinating card. It's got a paragraph of text on it. It's a 0-cost card, Hero Interrupt. When your hero makes a basic attack, discard the top card of the encounter deck. Reduce your hero's ATK for that attack by the number of printed boost icons on that card. If this attack still deals damage, ready your hero. So it's a way to trigger, it works really well in Drax to trigger Dweethite training a bunch of times. But if you have anything that happens every time you attack, you can get some massive amounts of readies all in one turn.
Does Scarlet Witch's Crown reduce that?
I don't know. I think it's anytime you count the number of icons on a card. I don't think it's a revealed boost card, so I'd have to go look. I was not prepared for your quiz. Someone tell us in the comments. I find that archetype really fascinating, because it kind of takes protection and puts it on its head. At least some of them do. But it also still lets you use your defense and then get to do things during the hero phase, which I really enjoy. Especially with Repurpose, because I can defend, and then the next round I can repurpose to start with to ready my hero, discard a tech upgrade, and then just go bananas for that round. And I find that to be a really fun way to play.
Yeah, I feel like that leans into... Oftentimes it mixes into kind of this damage reduction as well. Like if you're thinking about Drax, which is probably the quintessential hero that does this because of Leading Blow, right? Because of Tweet Mastery, wants to be attacking as much as possible to get those card draws, and so being able to ready lets you do that. And so you get into, we mentioned, I think, sidestep earlier for perfect defense, but you're able to kind of defend without actually exhausting to do it. So it's one to be ready. So there's a whole archetype around kind of doing that: sidestep, defiance, subdue, preemptive strike, and then obviously all the tech cards like energy barrier, force of projection that you can leverage with repurpose as well. So be able to kind of not have to actually exhaust on the villain phase, so you are ready to punch the enemy in the face when it comes to your hero phase.
Do you use subdue a lot in that deck?
I do sometimes. Okay. One cost for -3 attack is pretty good.
Yeah, and you could use it on somebody else.
Yeah.
I guess that brings up an interesting point. I've found in other aspects that a lot of times when I pick an archetype, I have to focus everything in my deck on that archetype to make it as powerful as it can be. But for some reason, when I build protection, I tend to choose 2 of these archetypes. So you just mentioned damage reduction and ready and basic power, or ready and do stuff. I always use tough and ready and do stuff, because it's for the same reason. I want to be able to not have to use my activation to defend. That way I can use it as many times as I can in the hero phase. So I'll grab Perseverance, or I'll grab Muster Courage, so I can tough up a bunch of allies to defend for me. So do you Do you find that in protection you kind of do that? You always mix two like mini archetypes together, and how they mash up makes a different puzzle.
I think it probably depends on the hero and what I'm trying to do. I
That's
will
fair.
say that perfect defense, I usually go all in. Like, I am not doing enemy barrier and those kind of things. Oftentimes, when I'm doing tech stuff, I feel forced to do repurpose because it's so good.
Mm,
It's so hard not to, right?
yes.
And so that's really good. I think you can mix like some of this stuff as well with some of the tough things as well, right? Like
Hmm.
if you can get tough, it also means I don't have to exhaust to defend. So I think like that's the goal I'm trying to go for,
Yeah.
even if there's different ways to get me there, right?
Fair. Um, do you want to pick the next archetype? I see two more at least.
Yeah, I think going off of that, there's this one that has been here in protection. So another thing you can do after you take damage is you want to heal the damage off, so you also don't have to flip down. And so of course, there's been second win in med team in the game for a long, long time, and more recently, we've gotten render medical aid as a side scheme, which is super strong. I can heal, I think, 5 off of any character per player. And
Hmm.
so you can pick if you want that in your allies or just your identity. And then we've gotten momentum shift, I think, earlier in wave one as well,
Okay. Yeah, I
on
see
top
both
of
of them.
what doesn't kill me, which is kind of both of those do a heal too. So you can do that in hero form.
This is another one where I see it's similar to Perfect Defense, where how you use Desperate Defense might be different between solo and multiplayer. There's a lot of healing cards that are like heal me, the protection player, and keep me healthy. And then there's ones like Med Team and Second Wind where it's like heal Hone over there because he needs health. And I know in our group there's a player that adamantly defends those healing cards, and I, as it is known, I am not necessarily a protection proponent. But I do enjoy playing support characters in almost every game I play. So I've gotten to like protection a lot more than I used to. And I've really started to believe my play buddy in how powerful healing actually is. Like, first aid was a staple at the beginning of the game, and part of the reason it was a staple is it avoids you having to flip down. Flipping down is bad. It means threat, it means a longer game, it means more chances for the villain to mess you up. So if you can keep the entire table healthy, it's like a completely satisfying role that lets everybody else, perform at their optimum. Like, what a leadership should be, player should be doing is like leading others to success, right? Letting them be the stars. So I think that's a cool archetype. I don't know if it's a fully fleshed out one. I don't know if I would run a card that's just like, I don't know if I would run a deck that's just like 25 things to heal. That seems slow.
I mean, what happens if you're just healing Venom the entire time from Spider? 5/5 ally.
It's fair.
I mean, pretty good. Pretty good. It probably just means you're playing too much Marvel Rivals because you're just healing people all the time.
Yeah.
Pew. Yeah, I agree. I think similar to status, it's one that you kind of want to mix in, usually with other things to probably make your kit stand out a little more, right? So
Hmm.
we're mentioning like Spider, if you have good allies that you can heal, like even healing 1 or 2 damage can be massive. And, like with Venom, that's like potentially a 10 damage swing.
Hmm.
So it can be pretty impactful.
Yep. I think another archetype that's kind of been there since the beginning of time again is encounter deck manipulation. Right at the beginning of the game, we had Black Widow, and we had Get Behind Me to cancel a treachery and turn it into an attack, which you like to defend against. But nowadays we have even more versions of that. We have the Silk Ally from the Spider-Verse wave, or the Champions wave, that lets you search the deck for a treachery and discard it. We had Spider-Man Noir, who can remove treacheries after the resolve from the encounter deck, so you can kind of curate the encounter deck to remove your problem cards. So I don't know if that's a fully fleshed out one. It's kind of like a little mini package you can bring. Um, but I think with certain heroes, you can make that super fun. Um, so I think it's coming into its own. Emerging, I
Yeah.
would call it, from day one.
Yeah, I feel like there's an interesting intersection between this and I feel like I know this isn't the yellow episode for Justice, but I do think you see some of that because of like Black Widow and other characters kind of in that set being pre-con Justice. So I think you get a little bit of both. Conveniently, Black Widow allies in protection, which I feel like is an underappreciated ally these days. Just I don't see her in a lot of decks, but man, how many times would you rather redraw that Shadows? Or redraw that Surge card even, right? Like a lot of great kind of things there.
Here's a question for you.
Yes.
So you're a Lord of the Rings nerd, right? So in a Lord of the Rings LCG, is there a certain they're called spears in that game?
Yes.
What sphere or
Spirit
color archetype is the like shadow card and counter deck manipulation?
Spirit.
Spirit.
Well, Spirit has Test of Will from Corset.
Yes. Do you think that protection is the most in line with like what Spirit was?
No, mostly because Spirit also is really good at willpower, which is probably the equivalent of questing.
Fascinating how different they are.
So I don't think so. I think leadership, which is purple but blue here, is probably the closest between the two, and then obviously you have aggression, which is like tactics and Lord of the Rings. But oddly, I think Spirit is probably the most that had. Well, actually, no. I take that back. There's lore which got into victory display shenanigans and things, which is maybe similar to some of this treachery manipulation. And we don't really have. We have obviously victory display as a concept, but we haven't really seen any kind of like victory display manipulation yet. I assume one day we'll get it if the game.
Right, that was it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, cables, it gets stuff in there, but the thing that you could do in Lord of the Rings that doesn't exist in Marvel maybe yet or maybe ever, but they seem to like to copy ideas, so I imagine we'll get it maybe one day. But you're able to move stuff into the victory display on your own. And so, like, after you resolve a treachery, you can put that treachery into the victory display, or after you kill a minion, you could put it in the victory display. So there was ways to basically put things in the victory display and then use that as not a resource, but as this like library. So there was like close the door card where if a card is in the victory display, you can just cancel that card. So if you put like the worst card in there, and there was also a side scheme or side quest that allow you to look at the top 5 cards of the encounter deck when you cleared it and just put any one of those 5 cards in the victory display. So, and then they had a hero that basically powered up the more things you had in the victory display as well.
Victory display.
Yeah.
Legendary had something like that too.
Yeah.
I think it was the Punisher character could like burn
like
cards from the victory
basically like
display,
bounties.
putting them back onto the board to like get extra damage and stuff. It was interesting.
Yeah. So I'm curious how if that archetype comes here, what that would look like, but I think that's always fun. Probably the one downside of Lord of the Rings is that it's kind of a slow archetype because you imagine you get much stronger like the more stuff you can put in there, and so in order to balance how strong the end game of that is, you have to make that character pretty weak.
Yeah.
To start with.
Do you have any missing emerging archetypes we haven't hit yet? I've got one more, but I didn't know if you had any other on your list too.
I think the only one I had left was kind of villain phase damage stuff. And I think we've had some stuff with Counterpunch, which I feel like didn't see a lot of value early on. It was hard to justify, like, why would I defend if my best stat is attack kind of thing? But we're starting to see a mix of this. Like, some of these things I think bled into some of the other things, right? Like, Dauntless, like if you can get more health and keep yourself healthy, you can get that for Retaliate, Electrostatic Armor. Both of these are great cards in that any of these like kind of perfect defense or you're defending a lot of packages. You had Nova from early on, right? The ability to kind of spend energy resources to do 2 damage to an attacking minion, first hit as well, right? On those. And I think they all kind of became much more interesting when Change of Fortune came out. So I think there's kind of like 2 parts of this, right? Like you just want to do damage to the villain. And so I think there's cards that intersect with both of those, and there's Change of Fortune where you actually want to kill the minion in the villain phase, which I think is really its own archetype kind of in here, right? And so you have Come Get Me Bub that helps you fetch minions for that. And yeah, I mean, Powerful Punch obviously works on both as well. So that's like I think that really came to light with Shadow Cat because that came with her kit of the ability to kind of punch the minion or villain really hard if you're going to defend there.
Yeah, even right after Kang came out, there was this whole like strategy to beat Kang that revolved around like defeating Kang during a villain phase. And if you did that, you got this huge advantage where you would get to take a turn before Kang does. Otherwise, usually Kang like sort of takes a turn before you. And ever since then, I've been fascinated with it. I used to run a lot of Miss Marvel with first hit, just because you can embiggen it to do 4 damage to something right as it's attacking, and I find that to be a cool way to like knock things out before they become problems. And I haven't revisited that with Come Get Me Bub, but I kind of feel like I need to now.
Yeah, it's like Come Get Me Bub plus Change in Fortune, I think, are really interesting cards in that Miss Marvel pack, just because you can recur first hit back.
And toughness. We love toughness.
Yeah.
The one I was thinking of was ally-based protection, right? Every aspect has allies, and a lot of the allies in protection, some of them like fit into like a certain archetype, right? Like North Star can cancel boost icons, so he can help with perfect defense, or he can help with like trying to not take damage. Some of them are just like big meat shields. Who am I thinking of? Polaris.
Rock Slide.
Give out a tough card. Yeah, Rock Slide's a big meat shield. Some of them do the encounter deck manipulation, some of them do the statuses. But they've inserted a couple cards that have tried to make us like focus on allies, kind of like Boot Camp did for aggression, to make us really like tuck in on how allies work. And the card I'm thinking of the most is Hangar Bay. So this is a 1-cost support from the Mutant Genesis wave. Response: after an ally defends against an attack and is not defeated, exhaust this card to ready that ally. The only use I've found for this so far is with who is it? Spider-Man UK.
Spider-Man UK.
Because he can defend and like knock things out before they damage him, and then he gets to ready and just like go around the table, or at least use it twice because you have to exhaust Hangar Bay. But I think we're still looking for the perfect way to make those ally builds. The most effective ally builds I've seen are ones that either play a bunch of cheap allies and then give them tough with Muster Courage, or they focus on like playing multiple man and getting him out multiple times and then cycling your deck as fast as you can so that you can get multiple man again. So I think both those decks are pretty cool, but we haven't seen the full potential of a protection style ally build deck.
How much do you... I know you hate Pin Down. Mm-hmm. But what about Pin Down, Hangar Bay, Warpath?
So that's what we call a 3-card combo, because there's 3 cards in it. Maybe even a 4-card combo, because it needs a minion. And I love it, and I'm here for it. I would love to try it. I haven't tried it yet, though. So Warpath is the one that after they defend against an attack, they let you play a hero action. Seems cute. I don't know what hero action I would play there that would make the 4-card combo
worth it.
I guess it lets you play like tackle between villain attacks, and then you can like stun during the villain phase. But I could also just like play Desperate Defense or Never Back Down. Right?
Well, Gamora.
So I get that 1 extra ping. That is, the combo player in me does like this idea.
Gets the 1 extra ping, but you could get that 1 extra ping, or you could play like a thing that gets you both pings, I guess.
Yeah.
There's Gamora. I feel like the deck that maybe I've used it somewhat in has just been Storm. You could play like Weather Goddess, so you could actually change your weather. Which is actually much more impactful.
Arrows as a Hawkeye during the villain phase, and I have never done that before. So this sounds like a thing I need to do.
Protection Hawkeye, Con. Heard it here
Hawkeye
first.
that plays like an aggression player. We're going to pin down a minion, and then we're going to fire off whatever arrow I need, whether it's sonic or electric arrow, to stop the next activation.
I mean, that's actually, I feel like that's interesting. Yeah, I mean the storm thing with the weather is actually pretty neat because you could like use it and then -1 the villain, like if you didn't have the thing to deal with it and you drew into a weather goddess, right?
You could use repurpose during the villain phase. Ready and get +6 defense and then defend again. But I do think that pin down plus minion plus warpath plus Hanger Bay is a lot. I think just pin down warpath and a minion is probably enough to make that build attractive. I don't know if you need Hanger Bay because
to the second one.
Yeah, like I don't know how often I'll have 2 events that I'm able to play that I have the resources for.
You just need to play Spider Woman where they're all 0 cost events.
Gross. There are 2 characters that came in that box, and one of them is good.
That's why you're an expert marksman, so you can play more.
It's true. They did
more
just
bow
right.
events.
I may as well use them.
Yeah. Before he flips the other side. Yeah, I do think Hanger Bay. I mean, I guess if we switch into some deck stuff, but I do think Hanger Bay and Storm has been really fun because you can use it to basically defend with an ally if they had tough, like armor, for instance, right? And then you can ready her and then chump with her that same turn for another, like someone else in a pinch.
Are you using Storm just to give everything like the -1 attack, or?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
-1 attack because that allows you. So I also run Subdue in that deck.
Yeah.
And so that allows you to potentially keep that ally around. So you could subdue attack on a minion, and they probably will survive. And so you can then Hanger Bay them to ready for potentially a second defense.
Makes sense.
And then you know, X-Men actually has access to a lot of tough allies like Colossus, Armor, Polaris.
So while we're talking about heroes like Storm that work well with protection, what are your like favorite top 3 heroes for protection for you? Who are they?
Spider-Man, the OG.
Liar. I'm just kidding. Yeah. I think
yeah, I think you've seen me play that deck. I think he just has a lot of stuff that leans into like having that anything that has a 3 defense. Anyone who has a 3 defense stat, it probably will do okay with perfect defense as a strategy. So that makes sense. And then he also has cards that lean into, I think, some of the stuff protection already does. So you're kind of going a little all in on this, but you know, when you're playing that heroic Rhino game, you're really happy when you're able to defend for people and also cancel those treacheries.
Okay, so Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
Excuses for him. Now
Yeah.
I can't use him because I have to say 3 different ones.
You have to say 3 different ones. The Storm deck that I mentioned, I think, is also super fun. So Storm's up there for me. I think she's super versatile, but I think Flash Freeze is an amazing defense event. So I think leaning into getting access to Jocasta to be able to like stash something like Flash Freeze is just a lot of fun. So I think anyone who has access to that, I think. And then my third one is probably Ghost Spider, just because George Stacy, right? George Stacy, like probably one of the best supports in the game, assuming he doesn't get lost to your obligation at some point. You lose all those events, but being able to stash like 3 events from your hand really, I think, helps solve a critical problem for any defense event heavy protection player, right?
Yeah. So for me, it is the first one. I'm going to count 2 characters, Drax and Star-Lord. I like both of those characters in the attack and ready repurpose, just kind of like. And then I was blasting meme decks, and they're super fun. So you just face tank some things, play a little dangerously, and see how far you can get. And you get access to Shake It Off, which is super fun. Ghost Spider was going to be one of mine, so we'll take that one away. Spider-Man was going to be one of mine, so we'll take that one away.
Sorry.
That's fair.
I did pick the theme for the con because I like the spider people.
Yeah, we're going to crush them. Okay, so Star-Lord Drax in the ready and do things mode.
Was I supposed to pick different ones for different archetypes? Because I also have
No,
those.
that's just what I'm trying to do, and I don't know why I'm
Uh,
putting that constraint on myself. But
X23 would have been one of the ones I would have suggested for
ooh,
ready in that
that would have been
category.
really good. That would have been excellent. I think
Yeah.
I'm gonna go OG here and say I really like Captain America with perfect defense. I think that with the shield blocks built in, and with 3 defense and a retaliate built in, he kind of like innately is prepared for that. I like heroic strike and how it combos with perfect defense even because I can heroic strike when I'm not the first player, and then I can defend for myself, or I can heroic strike and then defend for somebody else. So I like being able to control the villain phase a little bit. And
I get it. He's just alternate Spider-Man.
he is alternate Spider-Man, but he retaliates instead of drawing cards, and he's infinitely cooler. So, you know, like, his Aunt May is a whole building. I'm just saying, and it draws him a card.
But you could draw a card into another defense event that allows you to defend one more time.
Nah,
Cap has to wait to hero side to
I'd rather
ready.
die than defend. Maybe I'm not the good person to answer this. That's not true. I've gotten a lot better about not letting people die and defending for them. The other one for me is Black Panther. I think Black Panther is a super fun table defender because he's got self-healing in his kit. It gives me an excuse to not always just choose Panther Claws right away, but instead take Vibranium Suit, planning to defend for multiple people with desperate defenses and trigger my retaliate as many times as possible. I find Black Panther protection to be pretty fun.
Do you feel like perfect defense? He's not as great in perfect defense because he only has that 2 defense stat.
I don't usually run him in perfect defense. I usually run him in...
Well, you did say desperate defense, so
Well, I will use Desperate Defense, but I'll also use Indomitable, right? And I'll trigger Desperate Defense at the right times. And I'll use Energy Barrier like an adult. And then I have a 3 defense, just like Spider-Man. But I also have a Vibranium Suit, which Spider-Man does not have. But I think all of those are good protection heroes. I like them.
yep. Yeah. Spectrum.
It is a spectrum of protection heroes, you're right. Oh, you mean the hero spectrum.
Yeah, she really likes Ever Vigilant because she already starts in aerial,
That makes
and
sense.
she actually does not like defending most of the time.
She can heal sometimes, you know?
Yeah, she does it sometimes, but I do think being able to use her stat, twice when it's 3 is pretty good with Ever Vigilant or any kind of readying tech.
Have you done rocket protection with, like, repurpose and all the tech stuff yet?
I have not. Mostly because he really has
You'd
Tinker.
still be playing that game.
Yeah. I think with Tinker, it, like, makes me want to lean into flipping down and then burning his tech stuff that way
That's fair.
and getting the 2 cards. But I like Spider-Man too, so apparently I just like drawing cards. So,
Card draw. So, what do you think about protection? Do you think it has a unique spot in sort of like the sphere of Marvel Champions? Is it a fully fleshed out aspect at this point?
I think it is. I think it really helps. I think actually more than probably any of the other aspects. This might be a controversial take, but I think it helps kind of make the hero kit stand out a lot more. Like being able to ready, being able to heal and stay up, status stuff if that's what your hero does, right? So I think it has probably the most diversity around leaning into your hero kit the most.
Yep. I think it's still struggles a little bit in solo, but I think there's enough cards now that it's no longer like a solo cursed aspect. And I think a lot of that also has to do with like modern villain design. We don't have these villains that pop at 5 and 7 threat anymore. So you really get the breathing room to actually build a protection build. I think of all the aspects, I feel like protection is the most buildery, right? A lot of times I build a protection deck, I build it in Marvel CDB, and then I look at it and I'm like, wow, that's a deck that's just a pile of 20 upgrades. And it's like full like water and nerves of steel and energy barrier and like 6 other upgrades. And
3 hard ignores.
Yeah. How did I where are all the cards in my deck? They're just hero cards left, and that can be super fun.
Yeah, I will say I think in solo it is still really hard to get past the 2/2/2 stat line. I think not having two thwart makes it challenging still probably in protection to really kind of get mileage. I mean, your mileage may vary depending on the hero and the scenario you're playing,
Yeah.
but like I do think Spider-Man protection solo, you can lean to a bunch of stuff, but if you're gonna get a bunch of side schemes, he just doesn't have it in his kit, to really do it. So you got to lean outside, right? Like Moon Girl, whatever, Professor X. Like you really do need to lean into allies to, I think, make up for that.
I think in standard you're kind of fine with threat at this point. I think you weren't when the game first came out, but there's enough allies now that if you're playing solo protection, you just bring enough allies to take care of threat for you. And every hero's got some sort of threat management built into their hero.
His is Spider Tracer, dude.
I understand, but you now have come get me bub, right? So you can summon that minion, heal yourself and get a tough, throw a Spider Tracer on it, take care of it. I don't know. It seems doable.
It's fun when I think the scenario doesn't require it. Like if you get a ton of side teams that pop out, like you will just get buried though.
I wouldn't play solo protection against Hela. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or Venom Goblin.
We don't talk about Venom Goblin.
But any of the ones like or Unis or something, right? Like anything that actually has a lot of threat pressure, I think if your hero can't deal with it, I think protection you're really going to struggle. Yeah. Well, in solo, anyways. But other than that, we'll get there someday. I do think protection is great, and like we're even talking about Victory Display, like that's a whole archetype potentially that maybe it'll be protection if it comes, or maybe it'll be justice. Who knows? They may throw a curveball at us, but I do think there's a lot of potential for all these kind of semi-fleshed out archetypes in protection as well, right? Like I would not be surprised if they get fleshed out a lot more too.
Yeah. Well, we have 13 minutes left, so we'll. Week.
All of your projects have just been approved and funded.
Sharing here. Boom. So I am going to be sharing with you all a Ghost Spider protection deck. So I'm glad you said that Ghost Spider works well with protection, because she super does. Ghost Spider for green. So this is a deck I've been playing the last couple of weeks with our locals, and I call it my Fortune Seeker Ghost Spider deck. Nightcrawler was like sold out here for the longest time, and he finally came in, so I got to get a copy of Change of Fortune and see all the wonderful things that everybody's been talking about that I've been jealous to not have. And I built this Ghost Spider deck with the mindset of I kind of want to be able to table defend a little bit and defend for multiple people, but I also wanted to explore Ghost Spider using a ton of new cards that weren't there when she came out. And some cards came out in the wave right after her, but we'll go through the deck and we'll talk through it a little bit. So we've got 4 allies. We have Jocasta, Lockjaw, Nova, and White Fox. So there's going to be a theme with all these allies, and we'll explain it here in a minute. But we're kind of taking 2 of those archetypes, like I mentioned earlier, and smashing them together. So the first archetype we're going to jump to upgrades next is the Change of Fortune, do damage during the villain phase archetype. So Change of Fortune, obviously from Nightcrawler's pack, is after you defeat an enemy during the villain phase, exhaust this card to draw cards. So that's the fortune that we are seeking, right? We're going to try to do a bunch of things during the villain phase so that we get to draw cards like a good protection player does. We're also bringing in Nerves of Steel to trigger some defense events, because we're going to combine that with some table defending abilities. So to support Change of Fortune, I have several cards that can damage during the villain phase. We've got First Hit, right? So we can hit some damage during the villain phase, and that's a hero interrupt, so it lets us defend with Ghost Spider against the villain. And then we can try to defeat a minion with our hero interrupt to ready Ghost Spider and draw extra cards so that she can just go wild during the next phase. We bring 3 copies of Powerful Punch that came out in Mutant Genesis, so that was after Ghost Spider's Wave, so I'm trying out a new card with her. And 3 copies of Sidestep, so that's just another way to do damage during the villain phase. It's only 1 damage, but it might just be enough to defeat an enemy. And then on top of all that, we have Ghost Kick, right, which is after Ghost Spider uses basic power, deal 6 damage to an enemy, so you can defend, knock out an enemy, trigger Change of Fortune, ready Ghost Spider, draw your 2 cards, and just party like it's nobody's business. So that's, Archetype 1 is all about triggering Change of Fortune and seeking this glorious treasure during the villain phase. And then the second archetype is all about making sure that I can still fulfill my role as a table defender, which I guess I didn't mention that as an archetype, but to me that's like slightly different than perfect defense. I'm okay with taking a little bit of damage, but I want to try to be able to defend for multiple players in multiplayer. So here the way we do that is we take our basic defense with Ghost Spider, which is a defense of 3 defense. We then, for the second player, play a card like Deflection, which is going to reduce the amount of damage they take by 5. It's going to let us ready Ghost Spider using Ghost Spider's trigger, and then it's going to discard a ton of cards from the top of my deck. And if I discard a Digging Deep, it's going to go into my hand. If I discard a White Fox, it's going to go into play. If I discard a Lockjaw, I can pull him out of the trash and bring him out. If I discard a defense event that I wanted, like Sidestep, I can play Jocasta and kind of bring it back. So it's this whole, defend for the second player with Deflection. And then Ghost Spider is now ready, so I can, again, defend for the third player and hopefully get multiple 2 to 3 defense turns out during the villain phase, which I think is super fun and super interesting. The other thing that I wanted to note, was that your hero response on Web Bracelet is after you resolve an interrupt or responsibility on an event, exhaust Web Bracelet to draw a card. So if you have a Web Bracelet out and you have Change of Fortune out, you can play something like First Hit to knock out a minion and then draw 3 cards. And personally, I find that very fascinating and fun. So I want more of that. And it's been pretty fun. It's a really light on allies, which I like in protection decks, right? We don't need allies to survive. We can table defend on our own. But yeah, so I'll do the rundown of the deck list here and then let you poke questions about it as our resident protection expert. So I've got 4 allies: Jocasta, Lockjaw, Nova, and White Fox. I've got 29 events, so this is a event-heavy deck, which is awkward for Kennedy Hawk. We have 3 copies of Assess the Situation, because that card is crazy with George Stacy. We've got 3 copies of Deflection, 3 copies of First Hit, our Ghost Kicks, our Parental Guidance, our Phantom Flips, our Pirouette and Punches, and then I've got more punches, 3 Power Punches, 3 Riptos, and 3 Sidesteps. I guess I should mention Riptos, another way to defend and deal damage during the villain phase. For resources, I just brought the 3 copies of Digging Deep. I know I've seen some people say that they're not playing with side schemes, all side schemes in every deck anymore because they seem too samey. I'm starting to do that a lot with Digging Deep and trying to figure out where can I get away with not using my basic resources. For supports, we have George Stacy, and then for upgrades, it's 2 copies of Change of Fortune, 1 copy of Nerves of Steel, our Ticket to the Multiverse, and our Web Bracelets. So there you go. It is my Fortune Seeker Ghost Spider deck. What do you think, Hone?
This looks fun. I mean, as much as I know you don't like basic resources, I do like them a lot in Ghost Spider. You seem to have a lot of 2-cost events in there, so I feel like just off the cuff, it would seem like even with Nerves of Steel, if I want to, especially I think what's extra fun about this particular deck, especially with First Hits, is that you have access to George Stacy, so you can just stash those on him in case you don't have a minion, right? So it's I don't have a minion. Cool. When there is a minion at some point or on the table, I have access to First Hits, and they aren't dead cards or I don't have to use it to do that 2 damage to the villain, right? I really probably want to do that second interrupt because I get that ready off of it, right? So I do think that is actually really neat in Ghost Spider, and it just kind of paints that lens, I think, on all the events you're including in here.
Yeah, I found in general that George Stacy is super fun. with Ghost Spider, just because or with protection, because you can really, right, a lot of times with protection you're like thinking, should I hold this extra card till the next round so that it becomes relevant? But when you can tuck them all in George Stacy, you can kind of keep this toolbox ready. So I can keep one Riptos, one Deflection, and one First Hit. So whatever comes out, I'm ready to make sure I can trigger Change of Fortune or do my table defense or whatever I need to do. I had Come Get Me Bub in here for a while just to like guarantee myself minions to hit with first hits. But it didn't make the cut when I was already at 43 cards. I allow myself to go to 43 when I have assessed the situation, but I'm not happy about it still. Originally, I didn't have Deflection and Digging Deep, and I had the 3 double resources. And then I really decided I wanted to play Deflection because I think it's a card that I've never put in a deck before, and it seemed like a fun way to do it. So that's where that came in.
Yeah. My other thought is it sounds like you're doing a lot of basic defense because you want to get that ready. Mm-hmm. Did you have Armored Vest and it just didn't make the cut?
I did. I had Armored Vest and I cut it for Nerves of Steel because I found that I needed, and maybe this is pointing back to the basic resources, I needed the resource generation because Nerves of Steel works for Powerful Punch, it works for Riptos, and it works for Sidestep. Does not work for Deflection, but I found that if I wanted to be able to trigger those, especially because they're often sitting under George Stacy, I needed the extra resources more than I needed the Armored Vest. Because I'm not necessarily trying to trigger any perfect defenses other than from Riptos, and generally a 5 defense is enough to do that. That being said, it's not always enough to do that, so it could be useful.
Yeah, I mean, I think even outside of perfect defense, just because you are going to defend potentially multiple times, or you are defending for yourself and then someone else potentially, even with a deflection or a first hit or something. I found just having that 4 defense, because you aren't leaning into the other stuff, right? So like at most you're getting a riposte or sidestep, but kind of outside of that, if you're doing a powerful punch, you're not getting a defense boost. So, like Sentinel hits for 4 base, right? Like you're gonna take that 1 damage regardless of the boost there. So, I guess if you want to use basic defense, it feels like Armor Vest could be a good include. How much mileage is the assess situation giving you?
A lot. Mainly because you usually have super big hands once you get your engine going, right? If you're triggering Change of Fortune and Web Bracelet, you're burning through 9 to 10 cards out of your deck every round, right? Because you're burning through your 5, you're drawing 3 more. If you play Deflection, sometimes you see Digging Deeps or White Foxes, so you're burning through a ton of cards. And if you've played Assess the Situation the turn before that, it just sets you up to be able to trigger all of those villain phase triggers. The real reason for Assess the Situation is I put it in like every
Ticket to Multiverse?
Ticket to the Multiverse, right? Because you can put those on George Stacy, you can trigger them, use your Ticket to the Multiverse, and draw to 9 in Alter Ego form. Potentially play them again in those 9, and then draw to 12 at the start of the villain phase. And then at that point, you're just like constantly drawing 2 to 3 Assess the Situations and seeing like a third of your deck every turn, which is fun and maybe not necessary, but fun.
Do you feel like that's win more?
I feel like it's fun more. That's what I care about. I wouldn't say it's win more because it's also useful for just smoothing out your transition turns, and it's useful for making sure you have enough resources during the villain phase. If I have 1 extra resource on this turn, I'd rather turn that into 7 cards next turn than hold on to an Armored Vest that I couldn't play or something like that. In general, I'm a big fan of Assess the Situation, but specifically in protection decks that want to play during the villain phase, I think it's a very helpful card. You should try it out. You should assess the situation. Okay. Well, that is our hour timer. So we will wrap this episode up, and we'll be visiting another aspect in our next episode. So we'll publish this deck. If you tried it out, please let me know. Please tell me how right Hone was that I need Armored Vest, and go play some protection. Tell us what your favorite protection decks are, what your favorite archetypes are. Is there something we missed in our protection primer?
Psychic Misdirection.
No, that wasn't a misdirection. That was an honest question. until next time, see you, everybody.
See ya.